Hello everybody, so in this screencast I will be covering the following IB5 disparities, which are single index measurements. These are infant mortality, literacy rates, education expenditure, malnutrition prevalence, and gross domestic product. I'll be comparing these single index measurements with the IB5, which are Australia, France as my home country, the USA, Brazil, China, and Niger. So let's get started with the gross domestic product per PPP. So I will load up the data. So here we are. So you should know that it is a measure of the total output of a country that takes the gross domestic product and divides it by the number of people in the country. The per capita GDP is especially useful when comparing one country to another, because it shows the relative performance of the countries. A rise in the per capita GDP signals growth in the economy and tends to translate as an increasing in productivity. The PPP stands for Purchasing Power Parity. It equals out the value of money. So, for example, €1 in France will be less worth than €1 in Spain. So if we have a global look around the world, we can clearly see that the GDP is very high in Western Europe, especially Ireland, Norway, Germany, and is it Luxembourg? Let me check. Yes. So let's get out of here and look around the earth. Okay, here we are in the Arabian Peninsula. So here again, many countries are high up. This is the main cause of oil, but we'll talk about that later. In Southeast Asia also, the GDP is pretty high. And of course in Australia and North America. So if we have a closer look to Australia, for example, so if we click on the data, we can see that Australia is ranked as the number 18, it's like the 18 countries with the highest GDP. So it has $37,300 per capita. Compared to Zimbabwe, which has $2,000, it shows that Australia is very good economically, a wealthy country, and we'll later see that the education index will score very high as well. So, if we zoom out of here, and I will show you here a list of the IB5 countries with their GDP, including the highest country and the lowest. So, not surprisingly, our only country in Africa, in the African continent, is the last of the IB5 with a GDP per capita of $700. Then comes China with $5,400. Then Brazil with $9,500. Then France with $32,600. You can see that there's a pretty huge gap between these two countries. And then our last two are Australia with $37,300, and then the top one, of course, the USA with $45,800. So now, let's look at our highest country with the highest GDP in the whole world, which is Qatar. Like I said before, the main cause of this is oil. It's a really small country. They have a lot of natural resources. They buy many things in Europe and America, and they are economically very, very wealthy, and this makes them the number one in GDP in the world, even if like the population is not very, very big. So and like I said, Zimbabwe, our lowest country, with $200 for the GDP, and like we can see right now, apart from the south of Africa, many African countries, apart from the Equatorial Guinea and Gabon and the north of Africa, are really poor, and we can see that GDP is very, very low. And in Africa, we can it's Zimbabwe. We find the lowest GDP in the whole world. So now change and look at the people, and we are gonna see education expenditure. So let me find it first. Education expenditure, preview and math. Okay. So here we are again. So first of all, what is education expenditure? It is the amount of money that the government of a country puts into education. So how much money a country has to build school, for example, pay teachers, university, etc. It is taken as a percentage of the GDP. So normally, higher the GDP of a country, higher should be the education expenditure. No, we'll have a closer look at that, because you'll see it's kind of weird. And for example, if the GDP is very low and the education expenditure is very high, then you would say, oh my god, they put a lot of money in this school, but from the GDP taken is not that much. So, where could tag on? Let's see, because it was the higher GDP, so maybe they should have the highest education expenditure. But look, actually, Qatar are in the 131 place with 3.3%. So, as you may know or not, Qatar and education is not very good. Women very often go away from school at a very young age, and yes, they might have a high GDP. I thought that with a high GDP you would put loads of money in school, but as you can see, it's not the case everywhere. So let's have a closer look at Western Europe again, and to see our continent. So again here, no problems at all. They are very high, apart from the east of Europe, which is mainly a bit more poor than the Western Europe. But we can see that they put some money into education. Of course, our North America, Mexico, the USA, Canada put major amount of money into education, and Cuba is a very important one because, as you may know, they don't have a very high GDP and is not maybe the richest country in the world, but their education system is very, very good. So Africa again here, it's really there's a big contrast, I would say, because you can see that here in Algeria they seem to put a major amount of money, but then again in Central Africa we can see that they don't put that much, and in Sudan, for example, it's very good, and we have our highest, one of the highest, sorry, Lozno, which is a very small country, which puts actually 13% of his GDP into education. So this is really, really good. So again, here the Arabics, well, apart from Yemen, they don't seem to put much money into it. Southeast Asia, not very, very good. Australia, of course, they seem to put a lot of money. And here's our first country who puts the most money into education, and it's a really small country. If I get to click on it, well, Kiribati, never heard of it. So well, it's yeah, it's I think it's a composition of 5 islands, and of course, small country. They have some natural resources, so they can actually afford to put a lot of money into education, even if their population is not that big. So look at our IB5. We're gonna take Niger for example, because we saw early on that Africa is not very, very high in education, and it has a 3.4% of Niger's GDP goes actually into education. So this is not very high. But if we compare it to the USA or France, for example, so it was 3.4, and the USA is 5.3. There's not a huge gap, or it would kind of be the same number in France, I guess, 5.3, 5.7. It's not a big difference of the first look, but remember, it's the percentage of the total GDP, so it's the difference will be quite big, because USA and France have a very high GDP, and if you take 5% of their GDP, it would mean a much higher amount of money put into education than actually in Niger. So here again, I put up a little list for you with the IB5 countries, and wow, the actual last one is not Niger, but it's China with 1.9%. This is could be weird because, as we know these days, China is getting one of the superpowers of the world, and yeah, their main focus is not education, as it seems. Then it comes Niger with 3.4%, then Brazil with 4%, then Australia with 4.5%, then the US with 5.3%, and then finally France with 5.7%. So the highest was again Kiribati, and the lowest is the Equatorial Guinea with 0.6%. So let's stay in the education part of the index measurements. So I'm going to choose literacy rate percentage as a total population. So, well, we can see, well, first of all, it's really high all over the world, but what is literacy rate? Because it's a very important one. It is the percentage, sorry, of people with the ability to read and write in a country. And this is really impressive because, and really nice to see, as we can see that the major part of the world actually have a literacy rate which is really high. So, again, Western Europe, the whole Europe, I would even say, has 99 to 90%, so it's really, really good. In North America, sorry, again, very high GDP with 99% in Canada, 99% in the US. Even South America is scoring really high here. Again, when we pass through Africa, there's a more contrast. So our IB5 country, Niger, is actually is in the lowest one. So 3 places away from the actually last country. So that's not too reassuring. But and then when we see the Arabian Peninsula and South Asia with India, which is only 61% of the population, this can be actually a bit scary sometimes. But then when we look at the countries in more depth, then we can understand why. So again, here Australia, very high, such as all the other countries. So yeah, I'm going to take again Niger because we can actually contrast it with all the other countries. So Niger is in 193th place with 28.7% of the population, of the total population, can actually read and write. This is quite scary to be fair. But And for example, if we compare it to Brazil, which is an NIC, which it's getting developed, is actually 88.6% of the total population can read and write, which is quite good. So all over the world, I would say it is very good, apart, of course, in some countries of Africa, and here at the Arabian Peninsula and India, Afghanistan, and all these countries. Again, I'll put here a list with our IB5s and the ranking for you to read. And yeah, overall it's pretty good. And I just wanted to show you the highest one is in Andorra, between France and Spain, and it's actually 100% of the population can read and write, even if it's not really a country. It belongs half to France and half to Catalonia. So yeah, but here you go. Okay, our last index on the KML factbook is going to be infant mortality. Very, very important to see if a country is developing or not, and how his wealth care is. So here again, the lower the country, the lower the infant mortality. So first of all, what is infant mortality? It is the number of children that die before the age of 1 in 1,000 births. So if we have a closer look around the world again, we can see that, of course, our Western Europe, and I would say even the whole Europe, has a very low infant mortality rate. This is because of good health system, mainly. For example, in African countries, women tend to have many, many children, and so this can be dangerous for the mother, but also for the children, and this is not the case, for example, in Europe. Of course, if we go back to North America, again here, Australia, Canada, really low, Mexico as well, Brazil as well, in South America. So this is actually really reassuring for us. Then again, a really high contrast in Africa. This continent is really contrasting between when it was GDP, literacy rate, for the education expenditure, all of this. We can see that again. It's very contrasting. The north of Africa, which is actually pretty close to Europe, has a low infant mortality rate. But then again here, the highest country is in Africa. It's Angola, with 182.31 death per 1,000 births. So this is actually quite a lot when you know that every few seconds a child is born. So here we have West Asia, Southwest Asia, if I'm right. So it would be here. So again, here we can see that Afghanistan is the third country with 154.67 deaths per 1,000 births. So this is quite high as well. But then again, here we are. China is pretty low. We know that because, of course, the one-child policy, which actually changed not so far ago, and Australia again, which is really low, which is completely normal. So again, we're gonna take a look at Niger, because this is one of our main countries to look at, and it's actually in 5th place with 115.42 deaths per 1,000 children born under the age of 1. So this is actually quite high, and again we can see that Niger is a pretty poor country. The GDP wasn't that high. The education, it was better than, they put more money into education than China again, but we can see that. But the infant mortality rate is very, very high, and like many African countries, we should help them to get this down, and they need us and the wealth care we have and the technology we have to help them. And if we compare this, for example, to France, let's take France. France is actually pretty low, with 3.36 death per 1,000 live birth. And the last one is, again, like the literacy rate, a very, 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 very small country, which is Singapore, with 2.3 death per 1,000 live births. So I hope the KML factor was a good help for us. And for our last index, we'll have to access the Data World Bank, as we're going to look at malnutrition prevalence. So here we are. Malnutrition prevalence is the prevalence of a child malnutrition is the percentage of the children under the age of 5 whose weight for age is more than 2 standard deviation below the median for the international reference population age between 0 and 59 months. So the more the red countries, the higher is the malnutrition. Not too surprisingly, again, African countries are often coming out a lot. Again, here very high contrast between Algeria, who has under 1% of malnutrition, but then Niger, which is one of our focus countries, which is very, very red there, and like Ethiopia and Sudan and India as well. So we can see that actually, if we have a closer look under the equator, it seems, apart from Australia of course, that many countries are actually fighting with malnutrition prevalence. And surprisingly, I was looking at this map before, and I saw Germany in there. Germany is not too bad, is a bit higher than 2-3%, but I thought, well, okay, Germany is the #1 country in Europe. It's the most, with the highest GDP in Europe, and well, no, sorry, no, it is actually not, it's Norway, but yeah, it's one of the superpowers, and I'm like, okay, well, how can they have more malnutrition than France or the UK or even Poland or Italy or Spain? So okay, I hope you liked this video, and thank you very much for watching and listening, and see you soon. Bye.